As clashes escalate between protesters and police on American university campuses, will Canada follow suit? I'm Mercedes Stephenson. The West Block starts now. Temperatures have spiked at universities south of the border. Is Canada far behind? With protests at campuses across the country, arrests at the University of Calgary, and protesters vowing to dig in as Jewish students say they feel unsafe. Will Ottawa step in? And if Canada couldn't hit NATO's spending targets before, it may have just gotten a lot worse. As Canada struggles to make NATO's minimum spenders club requirements, the British are suggesting raising the bar even higher. For weeks now, we've seen emotional scenes of anger boiling over and police action to break up pro-Palestinian protest encampments on American university campuses. Last week, police in Calgary took a similar approach. There have been several Canadian campus protests also calling for their universities to divest from Israeli companies, but they have largely been tamer than their American counterparts and hadn't resulted in a police crackdown until Calgary last week. The rise in campus encampments and the accompanying signs and rhetoric have left many Jewish students feeling unsafe, though. Some of those students came to Ottawa last week to testify before MPs about anti-Semitism on campus.
Students have been physically assaulted, they've been doxxed, they've lost friends, they've been harassed, they've been followed, they've been degraded, dehumanized in a way that is unacceptable. Everyone is angry right now.
So how does our country ensure diversity and inclusion, holding those who threaten or intimidate or practice hate speech accountable, while ensuring freedom of speech and a right to protest? Joining me now is Kamal Khera, the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Persons with Disabilities. Thank you so much for joining us today, Minister. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too, Mercedes.
I wanted to start with talking about something that has so many Canadians watching very closely, and that's the protests that we've seen on campus in relation to the war between Israel and Hamas. Concerns by a lot of students about what's happening in Gaza, concerns by other students about protection of Jewish Canadians and Jewish people around the world. What are your thoughts on the protests that we've seen and some of the encampments that have building up? Are we on the route to seeing something similar to what the case has been in the U.S.?
Look, we know the local authorities are very much engaged in their jurisdictions in this matter. But, as a government, and I can tell you, we've always said this, we will always protect the Charter of Rights, guarantee the rights of freedom and, speech and expression. But it must not cross the line into hate and intimidation. And I can tell you, in times like this, where, temperatures are very high, my job is to make sure that we as a government do everything that we can to combat hate and to bring people together. And that's precisely what we have been doing since, day one, whether it is, working alongside my colleague, Minister of Public Safety, by ensuring that there is security infrastructure, enhancement to the security infrastructures program. I myself have put forward, $3 million through our Community Resiliency Fund to really ensure how we can bring communities together at this time. We're going to continue to make sure we're supporting communities and doing everything that we can to actually bring communities together.
Yeah, I think that's the concern, is that the temperature doesn't seem to be coming down. It seems to be doing the opposite. It seems to be getting more divisive, more concerning. We heard from Jewish students this week who testified both at a parliamentary committee and held a press conference on Parliament Hill, and they were saying that they don't feel safe on campus, and they feel that the diversity resources are not being applied to protect them. One student said, many Jewish students have decided not to attend classes because of the unsafe environment. Many have doubted whether they should even go to university anywhere in Canada. Does that indicate to you that enough is being done, do you think, to protect Jewish students on campus?
I think local authorities should be doing everything that they can, and as a federal government, we're there to support them in any of the work that they
But what
need.
do you think about it? personally
Well, I
as
can
the
tell you,
minister?
we need to make sure that we're supporting communities. In Canada, we need to make sure people and students, particularly places like universities and colleges, these are places that are meant to be debates. These are places where they're meant to be engaged in, debates with students, and they should not feel unsafe. And I know local authorities are very much engaged in their jurisdiction in this matter. As a government, we will always protect the Charter of Rights, freedom of expression and peaceful protest and assembly, but that must not cross the line into intimidation and hatred. That's the work that I know we've been doing since we've seen the instances of hate that we've seen. That's certainly increased, quite frankly, of hate crimes. That's why we're in this budget, we put forward $273 million for Canada's action plan on combating hate that is going to make sure that we're supporting communities on the ground.
There are Palestinian Canadians who are upset as well. They're upset with your government because they say there's a coming anti-racism strategy and that they wanted to see anti-Palestinian racism included in that. That's something your government has chosen not to do. Why not?
Look, I certainly look forward to talking about the content of the strategy once it is launched. We are at the final stage of its development after having, extensive consultations, within at-risk communities, Canadians that have been experiencing racism, and also want to fundamentally believe that racism is racism. And I think the goal of this strategy is to provide a framework for our government to tackle all forms of racism and discrimination within our own institutions, at the same time support at-risk communities, including Palestinian communities on the ground. And, the upcoming strategy is designed certainly to be evergreen in order to adapt to the evolving needs of communities that are experiencing racism and discrimination.
It's certainly a difficult time for many Canadians, whether it's dealing with feelings of insecurity or dealing with financial struggles. One of the things that your government did was to introduce an additional $200 a month for people who are disabled and unable to work. Obviously, costs are going up much faster than their income is. Why did your government only decide to give $200 a month, which many disability groups have panned as being nowhere near enough to keep people from being below the poverty line for situations that they can't control and health conditions that aren't their fault?
Look, Mercedes, I think it's first and foremost important to recognize that in Canada, for the first time ever, we have a Canada Disability Benefit, a national benefit that is going to help more than 600,000, some of the lowest income persons with disabilities in this country to, certainly improve their financial well-being. In this budget, we put forward $6.1 billion in this budget to do this work. That's additional $2,400 tax-free per year in the pockets of some of the lowest income persons with disabilities. I also want to recognize the fact that, this is an initial step that we put forward. As a government, we took a leadership role in establishing, first and foremost, a legacy legislation, in the Canada Disability Benefit. Now we're starting that work that needs to happen to make sure the money is getting to communities. This is an initial step. And as has been said, actually in the budget document, we aspire to see this benefit grow like other progressive benefits that we put forward as a government, like the Canada Child Benefit, like the Old Age Security Guaranteed Income Supplement, like the Workers Benefit. We want to make sure we're continuing to support Canadians with disabilities. But one of the most important things is to make sure that, provinces and territories do not claw back any of the benefits that we put forward. I think that is really, really important. And we're going to continue to make sure we work with them, not just to make sure that there are no clawbacks, but also to see what more we can do to support some of the most vulnerable in our communities.
When you announced the Canada Child Benefit, one of the benefits you noted back in 2016, your government stated it would lift 300,000 families, children, out of poverty. You haven't been able to say how many people with disabilities this $200 a month will lift out of poverty. Do you have that information?
Look, as I mentioned, Mercedes, for the first time ever in Canadian history, we have a benefit that is designed to support some of the needs.
And I understand that, Minister, but it's a pretty straightforward question about whether or not you have the number of people. I mean, surely you guys have done the math on this.
We are absolutely committed to making sure we're doing everything that we can to support some of the lowest income individuals living with disabilities. Through this budget, we put forward $6.1 billion in this budget, the single largest line item in this budget, that is going to ensure more than 600,000 persons with disabilities get that extra support that they need. This is really around, closing that poverty gap, but at the same time making sure that.
But if it's about closing the poverty gap, Minister, then why can't you tell us how many Canadians that will close the poverty gap for?
Look, we're going to continue to make sure that we do everything that we can. This is not the final step in this journey to support and lift people out of poverty. We're absolutely committed to doing that. As you mentioned Canada Child Benefit, I can tell you since 2015, we're a government that have been we're a government that has been there to support some of the most vulnerable Canadians in this country, to make sure we create this social safety net around Canadians through Canada Child Benefit, through Workers Benefit, through the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Now we put forward a significant $6.1 billion. That is the next step in this journey. We know there's more to do, and just like all the other progressive benefits that we put forward, these are meant to be expanded. These are meant to be expanded and enhanced. We're committed to doing that work, but we need to make sure we do this work responsibly by first and foremost making sure that provinces that have their own benefits provincially do not claw back the benefit that we have put forward, that this is an income supplement, not an income replacement. And that's exactly what we're committed to doing, not just this, but to do more to support some of the most vulnerable in our communities.
Okay, but no answer about how many, I guess, it's going to lift out of poverty. We'll keep asking that question. Minister, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Up next, a call for NATO countries to boost defense spending commitments, but Canada still can't hit the current targets. In his first major speech as British Foreign Minister, David Cameron underlined the importance of supporting NATO. On Thursday, he encouraged a new benchmark for NATO countries' defense spending, a rise to 2.5% of GDP, up from the current 2%. It's a target Britain is planning to reach in 2030. As for Canada, not so much. Ottawa hasn't met the minimum 2% since 1971. That threshold was determined by NATO 10 years ago.
When it comes to security, you get what you pay for, and it doesn't come on the cheap. In this dangerous world, we recognize that we need to invest additional effort and money. So today, the alliance made a pledge on defense investment.
Canada and Britain were two similar founding members of the Western Military Alliance, but it seems we are now taking divergent paths when it comes to defense spending. Joining us now is Philip Ingram. He is a former colonel in British military intelligence and NATO planner. Thank you so much for joining us today, Philip. A topic that really is on so many people's minds these days is defense and security as we work in this increasingly complex world. Many countries have been spending more on defense, but I think it was remarkable, and certainly at least here in Canada, somewhat unexpected to hear the UK come out and say that they want countries to go to 2.5% of GDP spending. Why do you think that the British government made the decision to push for this?
Well, I think it's a recognition of the threat that there is around the globe and the threat that's affecting NATO. We've got a major conflict in Europe at the moment. On the borders of NATO countries. We've got the Middle East beginning to fall apart. And from a longer term perspective, we've got China's expansionism policies in the South China Seas and China very carefully positioning itself in Africa, in South America, and elsewhere around the globe. And we're seeing elements of those regions coming together in the way they're working together more. So the threat from a global perspective has gone huge. And this is why I think the UK is trying to take a political lead in suggesting that the NATO standard should be lifted from 2% to 2.5%.
How much pressure is NATO under right now in terms of having the money, the personnel, the resources from NATO countries to be able to carry out not only its current missions, but the reality that you could see Russia try to invade another country, or any of those other number of threats you've mentioned, from Houthis carrying out attacks in the Mediterranean to concerns about Chinese and Iranian influence?
Well, the pressures are coming from two places. One, it's the international geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in at the moment, and the fact that as that's got exposed, it's shown that even countries that are spending above the 2% are not ready if there is a major conflict that NATO has to get involved in. They don't have enough ammunition, they don't have enough equipment and everything else. But the other bit that's coming in that's interesting is the Trump effect. I'll put it that way, because Donald Trump, when he was president beforehand, turned around and said that any country that's not paying its way, the United States wouldn't come and help defend. And paying its way, he meant 2% contribution to NATO. There's the danger that Donald Trump will become the next president of the United States. And I think there's a lot of countries within Europe and within NATO who are very worried about that. And we're seeing countries starting to increase their expenditure so that they don't feel the wrath of the tongue and the rhetoric of Donald Trump if he does get in.
Canada, of course, is one of those countries that does not meet 2% of GDP. And if you look at this graphic that we've made for our viewers, you can see you have to scroll down quite a ways to find Canada in between Italy and Slovenia when it comes to defense spending. Now, of course, the government has announced and promised more. Critics say that it's heavily backloaded. A lot of it doesn't kick in for at least 5 years. Even at that point, a lot of the estimates on spending seem well below what it would cost to procure the platforms that they're talking about buying. How is Canada perceived in NATO right now?
Well, Canada's perceived quite well in NATO. It's contributed to NATO operations. I've worked very closely with the Canadians through NATO operations in the Balkans. My colleagues have worked closely with the Canadians in Afghanistan. So Canada contributes, which is good. It may be in a small way, but the political impact of contributing is fantastic. It's also a member of the Five Eyes community. So it's got a special relationship with the United States, with the UK, with Australia and with New Zealand. That puts it in a very special place inside NATO. However, Canada's got two fronts it's looking after. It's got the front that is primarily NATO, the North Atlantic, that's on its eastern seaboard and out into Europe. But it's also got its Pacific front, and the calculations for that shouldn't really come into the NATO calculations. We automatically bring in the American percentage that they spend on defense and lump it all together and say that's the contribution to NATO. Well, no, a big percentage of that is a contribution to what it's having to do in the Pacific region. Canada should be doing the same, and that means the sort of 1.38% of GDP I think Canada spends on defence at the minute is actually a lot less when it comes to how much of that is focused on the NATO area of interest.
Well, and if we compare Canada's spending to, say, Britain's or Australia's, which is probably much more realistic than comparing us to the US in terms of the size of our population, the Brits and the Australians are both injecting far more money into defense. Even when you look at the defense review, it doesn't get us to 2%. It talks about being on the road to 2%. There's no deadline for that. Now we're talking about 2.5%. What happens going forward if Canada continues on the track that we're on now, where even that increase in defense spending isn't near the 2% we've pledged, much less 2.5% if other NATO allies end up agreeing to that?
Well, I think there's going to be some difficulties in the negotiations from the Five Eyes side, and pressure, if Donald Trump gets in, pressure from the United States. Canada's got some unique areas that it's protecting for all of us. It's got the Arctic that it's looking at, and a massive border that there is there. We know that there's Russian ambition for expansionism across the Arctic. Canada is the best placed country to sit and look after that threat, but it needs the investment to do that. If we go back to Cold War days, NATO countries were contributing 6%, 7% and more of their GDP into their defences. We are woefully off that at the moment, and the threat is probably much higher.
Well, when you speak about the Pacific, Canada is very challenged with our Navy on that side. In fact, we are about to put a frigate into dry dock in the Canadian Navy because we don't have enough people to sail it, let alone the fact that they're very old and constantly breaking down and having issues. When you look to the north, as you mentioned, and for our viewers, we created a map to point this out. We don't often think about essentially having a border that is on Russia, but the Arctic is. It is one long border that is facing Russia that we are unable to defend at the moment, and that's both a sovereignty risk for us. The U.S. will take that into their own hands, and a security risk for Canada. But domestically, politicians always have to sell the difference between guns and butter, as they say. And butter tends to sell better, particularly with Liberal governments. How do you think the UK is going to get countries like Canada to be politically receptive to this at a time when people are hard done by, they're struggling to afford groceries, and now they're talking about injecting large amounts into national defence? How much of a political challenge is that?
Well, yeah, I think the UK is having the same challenges and bits and pieces, and I think our politicians are getting the arguments wrong. If you look at where defence expenditure is spent, it's not spent overseas, it's spent domestically. So if you've got a defence industry, and Canada's got a good defence industry, if you've got a defence industry and you're buying equipment and you're buying ammunition and you're buying services and all the rest of it, you buy it at home, you buy it from your own suppliers. So what you're doing is you're using taxpayers' dollars to create jobs because you're investing in local companies. Those jobs will be paying taxes back into the economy again. They will be spending their money in the local economies, and therefore you're creating a wider supply chain and service chain. So the restaurants, the diners, the coffee shops and all the rest of it will be benefiting from increased job population because of defence expenditure in country. And I don't know why our politicians, and it's not just in Canada, it's the UK and it's elsewhere, aren't recognising the fact that this is a very good way of investing money back into the country again, and that's money that has come from taxpayers to try and improve the wherewithal within the country. A lot of people get upset that it's being spent on defence. It's an insurance policy. If you spend it on defence and you stop there being a conflict, it's a lot cheaper than spending it on defence when you're in a conflict.
Philip Ingram, thank you so much for joining us with your expertise.
Thank you.
Up next, one last thing that the Canadian forces don't need. We'll find out what it is. And now for one last thing. It's no secret that our military is struggling. We've heard the Chief of the Defence Staff say that it's near a crisis, and we've heard the Minister of National Defence talk about the Canadian Armed Forces going into a death spiral. So why is it that our leaders, our Prime Minister, his cabinet, have not made a decision about who should lead the military next? They have to choose a new Chief of the Defence Staff, and without that choice being made, it's having a substantial impact on how the military functions. Why? Well, because other senior appointments can't be announced until that one is decided. Sources tell Global News that the Minister of National Defence's office has not signed off on the senior appointments for the Canadian Armed Forces. That impacts not only the handover of critical information for our national security from one commander to their successor, but also military families who have to move across the country and change their lives every time there is a new posting. They need to know where they're going. The government is expected to make the announcement in coming weeks, but it has been slow to start, and it is having a very real impact on the military, which the Chief of the Defence Staff said himself this past week, and on the personnel, one they can ill afford to have at a time of low spending and a slow drive for recruitment and retention. That's our show for this week, and we would like to take a moment to wish a very happy Mother's Day to all the mums out there, especially my mom, Linda, who watches every Sunday. Thanks, Mom. We'll see you next week.